Hello, we're going to discuss business forecasting for business mathematics and statistics. As a managerial decision making tool, business mathematics has been used many times. But to predict what is going to happen with your sales, what kind of demand curve you are going to face next financial year, what kind of supply curve you are looking at, what is the expectant gap between demand and supply, how more demand can be created in case supply is more than demand, your productivity is more than demand. These things are purely dependent upon forecasting of various activities. On the basis of what we do, we critically analyze the records of past periods to predict in a proper manner the values that we are going to face in the next financial year. Success in business is dependent upon proper forecast of business events. In business or trading activities, importance of forecasting is so great that when someone enters into the business arena, he wants to enter the profession of forecasting. In recent times, considerable research has been conducted in this field, and behavioral scientists are trying always attempting to make forecasting as scientific as possible, thereby making the error-prone forecasting methods to be more successful and more critical. Business forecasting is the process of estimating the relevant events based on past data for future. So it's generally based on the analysis of past and present behavior so that a future event can be predicted. According to Natter and Weisserman, business forecasting refers to the statistical analysis of the past and current movements in a given time series so that we can obtain clues about future pattern of the movement that is going to take place. So business forecasting is related to the future period, but the analysis of data depends primarily the events that has already happened and the events that is currently happening in the business sphere. Strategic decision making keeping in regard, keeping in mind the demand and supply that is going to happen in a space of a few days, few months and few years. It requires future orientation. So forecasting is future oriented, and forecasting is part of environmental analysis. It is more or less concerned with developing plausible projections of the direction, scope and intensity of environmental change. So we are talking about direction and scope. Direction implies where we are going in terms of our demand, and it contains considerable amount of planning on the part of the managers so that adequate past data is collected for future analysis, and these data are required to be good enough. Investigative bias should not go into these data. According to Leo Varnes, the aim of forecasting is to establish as accurately as possible the probable behavior of certain economic activity which is based on all data available and to set policies in terms of these probabilities. So which means, as I've already told you, future forecasting based on present and past data. So the quality of the data is very important from the point of view of prediction. But why do we need to forecast? Who makes such forecasts? And what are the ingredients that is required for good forecasting? The first answer is that we need to forecast a little bit about our business to make sure that uncertain events in the future doesn't surprise us business wise. Suppose we are currently selling a small amount of, we are a small manufacturing firm selling a small amount of the product, maybe 1000 units. So next year also we don't expect the supply to go up because there is not enough demand for our product in the market. So we are prepared for like 5% to 8% changes. But if suddenly the demand is increasing by 30%, we are not ready for that. We are not ready, we are not in a position to increase the pace of supply to match that of demand. Because under those circumstances, we are not prepared with regard to raw material, with regard to labor, with regard to machinery and equipment. So you will lose valuable business. But who is going to make forecasts? Business houses, households, government, they do make forecasting. A good ingredient of better forecasting is a good judgment applied to identification of appropriate information and application of forecasting process. So the judgment applied to the identification of appropriate information is pretty required, vitally critical, and its application of forecasting process is also absolutely necessary, because unless you do such an activity in a proper manner, the forecasting might go wrong and it will bleed the business to death. Forecasting essentially is a part of human conduct. Once a business is started, there is no limit till the business can go. So businessmen, managers, suppliers, supply chain networks, they are required to look at the future. The success in business depends on correct predictions. In fact, when a man enters the business, he automatically takes with it the responsibility for attempting to forecast the future. However, we should know that it is almost impossible to forecast the future exactly. There is a possibility of occurrence of some range of error in the forecasting process. The statistical forecasts are the methods in which we can use the mathematical theory of probability to measure the risk of errors in the predictions. So there is no way we can guarantee 100% success of forecasting methods. So forecasting methods sometimes can go wrong. Forecasting is important from the view of promotion of organization. It's also a very key part of future planning. Once the plan is ready, we need to coordinate and control. Proper forecasting will bring success to organization because you know in advance what kind of advertisement is required, what kind of production planning is required, what kind of purchase planning is required. Forecasting is related to future events. It defines the probability of happening future events. So forecasting throws some light into the end of dark tunnel. The forecasting horizon for a long-term forecasting is like 5+ years, more than 5 years. It includes research and development, plant location, product planning, etc. Principally, long-term planning, long-term forecasting is principally judgment-based, medium-term in nature. It includes aggregate planning, capacity planning, sales forecasting, demand forecasting, and it takes into consideration a mixture of quantitative methods and judgment on the part of managers, judgment on the part of planners, judgment on the part of administrators. Short-term forecasting horizon is like 1 day to 1 year. It is more or less related to demand forecasting, staffing, purchasing, stock taking. Short-term forecasting completely reliant on quantitative methods. The short-term forecasting has several needs which cannot be overlooked, like scheduling of existing resources. Whatever resources we have, how should we be utilizing them in a proper manner so that maximization of resources can be done without making wastage of these resources. How many employees an organization needs? 20, 30, 100, 500, maybe 1000. How do you plan? How should we plan for acquiring additional resources? What is the logic behind, what is the rationale behind additional requirement of resources? How large our orders are going to be? What kind of machine we require? Which services are going in demand? Which services, which products are declining? What kind of people we are going to hire? Qualitative, experienced, educated, without experience, who can learn fast, younger experienced, young people without experience, experienced people without the skill. What kind of people we are going to hire for the short-term forecasting? Forecasting is basically used in a variety of assets such as production, planning, budgeting, strategic planning, sales analysis, inventory control, marketing planning, logistic planning, and purchasing. It's important to look at forecasting effectiveness. Forecasting techniques are also most accurate when the environment surrounding the business for which you are preparing a forecasting is not rapidly changing. So basically, we're looking at maximization of the resources, and we will be able to do such a thing if there is minimization of wastages. Strategic planning always thinks at and always looks at coordinating each and every activity in a manner that it controls wasteful activity. An executive is given a proper task, but he is delaying his activity, and at the same time he is also delaying. He is being the principal reason for delaying some other executive's activity because his activity is coordinated and controlled and correlated to another executive's act. So by delaying your own act, you are delaying others. So principally, you are responsible for that part of wastage. There are different kinds of forecasting models. The first kind of forecasting model is qualitative in nature, based on experience, judgment, and knowledge. These kind of forecasting methods, models, are based upon and belongs to those activities, executive activities, for which the data is very difficult to calculate. But in case of quantitative models, these models are based on data and statistics. You cannot and you are not in a position to ignore these kind of data, because these kind of activities are directly related to data, demand forecasting. Maximum amount of data that can go into demand forecasting is of quantitative nature. But there is something like change in taste and preference which can be qualitative in nature. Quantitative forecasting relies more on numerical data and mathematical modeling to predict future conditions. There are two types of quantitative forecasting which is very frequently used: time series. Time series methods use historical data to develop forecast of the future. The underlying assumption is that a pattern do exist between the data which is gathered for last few years and the future's actions, future quantities are going to be based on the basis of past data. But time series method itself don't predict the impact of present and future actions that managers might take to bring about change, because a time series is completely reliant on quantitative data that is gathered for past years. A trend that reflects a long range general movement is either an upward or a downward direction. So time series is like a linear trend. A seasonal pattern also can be calculated from the time series, which indicates either an upward or downward change coinciding with a particular point within a given year. A cyclical pattern like a seasonal index can also be calculated. Time series are more valuable for predicting broad environmental factors than in predicting the impact of present and future actions, because while calculating, managers and researchers do make use of only the past data. So the predictions of time series is not going to be affected by any other decision making prowess that is associated with the data, because time series rely on past trends, data is related to years which has already gone by, that if environmental changes happen in the future, these data will become redundant, and there is a danger lurking behind usage of such data which are only concerned with past actions. It has nothing to do with the present actions because of dynamic changes that is happening in the industry and in the economy in general. There is a second model which is the explanatory or causal model. It attempts to identify the major variables that are related to or have caused particular past conditions and then use current measures of those variables to predict future conditions. These models allow managers to assess the probable impact of changes in the predictors, which means you can identify some kind of major variables which has caused or which is required, expected to cause particular variation in the past condition, and because of that you can always going to use that to predict future values. Regression models are one of the causal methods that express the fluctuation in variable being forecasted in terms of fluctuations among one or more other variables. The second model is the econometric model. It's a system of simultaneous multiple regression equations involving several predictor variables used to identify and measure a particular relationship that will exist within the economy. Leading indicators are variables that tend to be correlating with the phenomenon of major interest, but also tend to occur in advance of the phenomenon. So there are certain indicators which are taken as variables on the face of it, which do not change in the short run or even in the medium run. But some variables are there which will keep on changing each year, each season, because they are variable in nature. So such indicators tend to correlate with the phenomena of major interest, like change in taste and preference, change in purchasing power. So if such things keep on changing, then the leading indicator will give a result which is different from that you are thinking. The qualitative forecasting is more technical. It's primarily aimed at predicting long-term trends in technology and other aspects of environment, and it focuses on long-term issues rather than less utilization of numerical data. These methods are DELPHI method and scenario analysis. DELPHI method is a structured process for consolidating the opinions of a group of experts into a judgment on an issue, usually about the future. In DELPHI method, there is a panel, there is a facilitator, and there is a question. With the help of the facilitator, there will be some kind of research work and brainstorming. At the end, the panel will come to some conclusion using a series of surveys. DELPHI method was developed by Rand Corporation of USA to assess impact of technology on warfare. Used a variety of forecasting studies including technical prediction, increasingly being used for consensus building in policy development and strategy planning. This means this doesn't take into consideration serious quantitative data, because in the desired field quantitative data may not have been available. In the absence of quantitative data, this becomes paramount for the researcher to use the method. The identity of each expert included in the group is not revealed to each other. This helps to reduce the bias that can creep into or ego of each expert when they react to others' opinions, because you never know, even if you are a panelist, what the other is thinking about your opinion. There is a coordinator who prepares the questionnaires and circulates it among the entire panel and collects the opinions. He should be able to help the experts converge in their opinion so that a particular analysis can be reached within a specific period of time. The next is judgmental forecasting. Judgmental forecasting relies mainly on individual judgments. Judgmental forecasting are highly susceptible to bias because of individual judgment. The jury of executive opinion is one of the two judgmental forecasting models. Jury is a means of forecasting in which organization executive hold a meeting and estimate as a group a forecast for a particular item, whether the demand is going to go up or going to go down, whether the raw material price is increasing or decreasing. Sales force composite is a means of forecasting that is used mainly to predict future sales and typically involves obtaining the view of salespeople, sales managers, distributors, salesmen. So its sales force forecast is regarding the outlook of a particular institution, company's future sales requirement, demand that can be there within a specific period of time. So after taking into consideration the opinions of all these people, all these type of people that is engaged in selling and marketing, you can take an average opinion and predict that sales are either going to decrease or increase. The choice of which forecasting method we should use. Quantitative forecasting method can be used in a short to medium time horizon. It requires a short period of time if a particular method is going to be used. But quantitative forecasting model is very costly, but they're high in identifying accuracy in a particular pattern. But these quantitative models like time series analysis, regression model, they're pretty difficult to understand by the workforce. So they are difficult to be implemented. Technological forecasting method has a medium to long time horizon because you are looking at changes in technology that can happen over a period of time. Require medium to long time. The development cost is minimum because it doesn't involve a particular model building. This is not as accurate as the quantitative method, but one of the finer points is that it can be easily understood by people who are working within the team. Judgmental forecasting method, it can be very short and very long. Normally it requires a short period of time to be modeled. Because of the time involved, the cost of development of the judgmental forecasting method is very low, but it's of low accuracy in predicting turning points because of high value of bias in the predicament. Because it involves inside people, it is easily understandable. But there are some suggestions which are applicable to an organization. Uses a forecasting method which is very simple. Compare every forecast with no change so that you can be certain that if some kind of change happens in the environment, then your model is not going to be actively concrete. Don't rely on a single forecasting method. Use various methods to gather various kinds of data. Don't always assume that you are going to be able to calculate very accurately the turning points in a trend. Shorten the length of the forecast. Keep doing the forecasting again and again. Forecasting is a human managerial skill, and when practiced enough, it can give you better results. Examples of forecasting: demand for number of clerks, tailors in a bank, traffic or major communication switch, how much time it is required to switch off and switch on of a traffic light, demand for liquor in a bar, demand for frozen foods and other food items in a grocery store. Example from industry: I have taken the American Hospital Supply Corporation. It supplies 70,000 items. It has 25 stocking locations, godowns at 25 places. It stores 3 years of data. The data point is huge, 63 million data points. It updates the forecasting every month, 21 million forecast updates per year. So you cannot forecast for 6 months and then sit down that look, we have made a forecast, so we are going to be completely true, but that may not be correct all the time. So we need to do the forecasting again and again, so that if there is any kind of changes, we can include that in the forecasting. Business forecasting is based on past and present conditions, present data. It is based on mathematical and statistical methods as well as non-qualitative and non-quantitative methods. It considers forecasting for a particular period, basically estimates about future. The scope can be short-term, long-term and medium-term, but to make a valid assumption on the long-term forecasting, we need to continue forecasting for some more time to be able to make sure that forecasting is correct. There is various steps involved in forecasting. Understanding why the changes in the past have occurred. What are the reasons behind the changes that has already taken place? Determining with certainty which phase of business activity must be measured and why. Selecting and compiling data to be used as measuring devices. Analyzing the data and taking out conclusions out of it. The major benefit of forecasting is that it is a huge aid in decision making. It informs planning and resource allocation decisions. If the data is of high quality without bias, it can be accurate. So data is of important nature. Data is of utmost importance while we are using quantitative methods. There are various kinds of methods that can be applied, starting from business barometers, time series analysis, regression analysis, and exponential smoothing. We'll discuss a few. Business barometer are business indices that are constructed to study and analyze the business activities on the basis of which future conditions are predetermined. These barometers are calculated, conditioned, examined, analyzed by economists, by industry researchers. As business indices are indicators of future conditions, they are also known as business barometers, business bars. There are different kinds of business barometers: general business activity, specific and individual business firms. The time series analysis is also and can be used for purpose of making business forecasting. This is one of the most important methods of forecasting. Forecasting through time analysis, time series analysis, is possible only when the business data of various years are available, which will reflect a particular trend and seasonal variation. By time series analysis, the long-term trend, secular trend, seasonal trend, and cyclical variations can be ascertained, analyzed, and separated from data of various years. So if 5 years data is given, we can be able to conclude on the basis of that what is the expected demand in the 6th, 7th or 8th years. Business forecasting has different utility to different kinds of businesses. Business forecasting helps the businessman, an industrialist, producer, manufacturer to form the policies and plans which is related to the activities of demand and supply. On the basis of forecasting, the businessman can forecast the demand, price, condition of the market, whether there is boom, recession, precipitation condition prevailing in the market. The business decision can also be reviewed on the basis of business forecasting, and business forecasting is required to be conducted at certain small intervals to look at whether there is any kind of change that is happening generally in the economy, and these changes are bringing any kind of changes to the overall forecasting values. Business forecasting helps in increasing profit and reducing losses. It is also helpful in making management decisions regarding production, regarding raw material purchase, regarding supply, regarding packaging. It's very useful to overall administration because you know in advance what kind of changes that is going to take place overall in the market. It is also basis for capital market, the FDI inflow, trading, export pattern, prices prevailing in international market. They can be calculated through forecasting. It is also useful in controlling the effect of business cycles. If you are forecasting the demand from the data which is given in the recessionary period, and you are calculating the data for a future period which can be a boom condition, you can control the business cycle because you know that what kind of increase in sales, increase in demand can be expected in the boom period. So you make necessary structural changes to your model. It helps in achieving the primary goal of maximizing resources and minimizing cost. It also facilitates control. Forecasting is planning. It's often said that if you're failing to plan, then you're planning to fail. If you're doing a plan, then you are facilitating control because you know in advance what kind of changes can happen. So you are in control of the situation. You can have a plan A. If plan A fails, you have plan B. So you are in control of the situation all the time. Forecasting has its utility to the society because government normally takes control of these methodologies to plan for future actions, future expenditures, future revenues. So these bring social utility to the economic in general. But as always, like others, business forecasting cannot be exactly accurate all the time. It has its own limitations. The forecastings cannot be accurate because it is largely based on future events, and futures sometimes has little to do with past data. So there is no guarantee that the future predicted events are going to happen in the same manner as predicted. Business forecasting is generally made by using statistical and mathematical methods, but none of the methods claim to be able to make prediction exactly in the correct manner and look like predicting a certain event in the uncertain future. So no method has been developed so far which is foolproof. The underlying assumptions of business forecasting cannot be satisfied simultaneously. In such a case, the result of forecasting will be misleading, which is going to completely miss what we are aiming at. The forecasting cannot guarantee the elimination of errors and mistakes. The managerial decision will be wrong if the forecasting is done in a wrong manner. So that's why the calculation of data, the analysis of data is a must in a predetermined manner so as we are able to completely eliminate the bias from the usage of data. So all in all, forecasting is part of human conduct. Businessmen always need to look at the future. They look at predicting the future, what future holds for their business. If you don't look at the future, then you are not ready for any kind of sudden eventuality. So by doing forecasting, you're looking at future in a manner in which you are always going to be completely in control, and if any kind of sudden change happens to take place, you're ready for that. But to do that, you're going to need lot many analytical tools which you are going to use, like time series, regression, business indices, business barometers, and all the things. So forecasting is of utmost importance in the scheme of things for a businessman. We have come to the conclusion of calculating, analyzing various things about business forecasting. We will be next time we'll be doing something regarding time series analysis. And till then, thank you very much. Bye bye.